Static Yogis, I'm Zach Sprinkle. Today I thought I would make a quick video on what's called lower cross syndrome. This is a pretty common postural defect. As a matter of fact, I have a pretty bad case of it because of the injury in my lower back. I have a really hyperlordosis in the lower spine, which is kind of where this began for me. So in today's video, we're going to go over exactly what this is, what causes it, and how we can make a few modifications in our day-to-day practice to help correct the situation and restore balance to our body. Lower cross syndrome, what is it? Basically, it's when we're in a chronic state of the pelvis being tilted forward. Now this develops from sitting down all day. For me, it developed with my back injury because I work construction all day. So I was up moving around. However, because of the pain in my back, I would just always tilt my pelvis forward just because it felt more comfortable for me. So the term lower cross syndrome, we want to think of like an imaginary X. As we're looking through the body from the side, we want to imagine an imaginary X running right through the pelvis. So I'm starting in a nice neutral position here. So I'm going to show you guys what lower cross syndrome looks like as I tilt the pelvis forward. You can see I have a pronounced curve in the lumbar spine as well as I'm closing off my hips here. So if we can go back to the imaginary X that's running through my hips here. So we want to draw that imaginary line from my abdominals through the hip to my glutes, and then again from the lower back all the way through the hips up to the front where the hip flexors are. And so what this is, we have a tightness in the hip flexors and a tightness in the lower back, and that's tilting my pelvis forward. And it also means that I have a weakness in the abdominals and a weakness in the glutes. So that's what makes the cross here. So we're weak, that makes the one line, we're tight, and that's what makes the other line. So that's where the cross comes from in the lower cross syndrome. To give you a quick example on how this is such a common condition that people deal with, is we can just imagine sitting at my desk all day working, and I have my ergonomically designed chair that I spent a lot of money on that's going to keep my back nice and straight. It's got some lumbar support there. However, look at what's happening as I'm sitting in that chair. It's got the nice curve. I'm tilting the pelvis forward. I'm shortening the muscles and the tissues in my lower back, and I'm shortening the hip flexors here. So this is where it can start in a lot of people just sitting like this all day. So now the good news with this condition is it's completely fixable. It just takes maintenance, and we just need to be aware of it, number one, and then just take the proper steps to correct it slowly over time. We have to remember, if this took us 10 years to develop, we're pretty foolish to think that we're gonna just fix a few things in our yoga class and then all of a sudden it's gonna go away. If it took you many years to develop, it's probably gonna take you a few years to fully correct. But it all starts with the first step. Now let's just go over a few poses that will give you the opportunity, now that you know what's going on, to make some modifications and start to correct the situation of lower cross syndrome. So one of my favorite ways to stretch out my lower back, and this just makes me very aware of the position of my pelvis, is in my pyramid pose. So I'm going to get into my pyramid pose here. I'm going to go into left side pyramid. So my left foot is forward, it's running nice and parallel with the mat. My back foot's at 45 degrees. I want to make sure that my hips are nice and square with the mat. And I'm going to go ahead and enter this with a flat back until I reach my edge here. So right now, this is a great stretch on the hamstring. So now my left hamstring is really feeling this. This is the limit of my flexibility in this pose with a flat back. So I'm going to stay here for about 4 or 5 breaths. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to posteriorly tilt the pelvis. So I'm going to tuck the tailbone under, round out the lower back. So now my lumbar spine is in flexion. And I'm going to just round out the spine here. Rounding down as far as I can go, really keeping the tailbone tucked. Engaging the abdominals here. Another pose we can work on stretching out the lower back is our basic forward bend. So what we can do in this pose, a common cue is to enter with a flat back. So here's what we're going to do. As you can see, the pelvis is tilting forward a little bit. And I'm going to keep my legs nice and straight. And once my hamstrings are done, right now, my hamstrings are about out of flexibility. So I'm going to do the same thing I did in my pyramid pose, is I'm going to posteriorly tilt the pelvis by tucking the tailbone under, rounding out the lower back. I can feel the stretch now here. It goes from being in the hamstrings here to being in the lower back, and then curling down. Keeping the abdominals engaged. And when I want to exit this pose, I like to curl up the spine, so I keep the tailbone tucked, abdominals engaged here. And rise all the way up to stand with a rounded spine. Now, this particular pose is known as an adductor stretch, and we're going to be stretching out the adductors. However, this isn't for the lower back so much, as our adductor muscles pretty much start in kind of the back part of the thigh, and then we're all adductor muscles on everything the inside coming around to the front. So a lot of our adductor stretches are actually stretching out kind of more the back side and then the center. We're going to get into the adductor muscles that are more in the front of the thigh. So the way that we do this is we get into our frog pose. We want to make a double 90-degree bend, 90-degree bend at the knees, flex the feet. And we're going to work this one two different ways. So what we're going to do, we're going to come down to our forearms. Then we're going to tilt the pelvis forward. Go ahead and arch the lower back. And I like to gently bring it back and forth. This is the stretch for me. In my frog pose, I rarely do static stretches. I always gently rock it back and forth. It's just what feels better in my body. So I want to do this a few times here. And now I want to find the center, and I'm going to tilt the pelvis to the back. So I'm going to round out the lower spine, and this transfers the stretch to the adductor muscles more on the front of the thigh, and you will definitely feel it. Keep the tailbone tucked, abdominals engaged. And it becomes a whole different stretch here. All right, we've gone over a couple of ways to loosen up the lower back, just doing the average poses you're already doing. Now let's get into how to loosen up the psoas and the iliacus. We're going to keep the quad stretches out of it, because a lot of times what happens in quad stretches, even though the quad muscle is responsible for hip flexion, what we end up doing in our quad stretches is, as I pull deep into the stretch, see, I'm arching my lower back, which means I'm tilting the pelvis forward, which I'm still placing tension on the quad muscle because I'm bending at the knee as well. However, this is going to actually shorten my other hip flexors, my psoas, and my iliacus. So we want to lengthen those muscles out. So we have to have the pelvis posteriorly tilted. In other words, tucking the tailbone under, rolling the pelvis back. So what I want to do, let's start off in a low crescent lunge here. Now again, I'm going to stay away from the King Arthur quad stretch. We can do the King Arthur quad stretch if we really pay attention to tilting the pelvis back, but that becomes a lot to think about when you're first learning this. Over time, you'll be able to figure it out, but right now, I want us to be able to feel the iliopsoas as we stretch it out, and I don't want the feelings from the quad muscle to interfere. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and extend the right leg as far back as we can. Just take it as far as it'll go. And we want to come up to an upright position, and now we want to tilt the pelvis back. So we want to posteriorly tilt the pelvis, and you should feel this start to build up right here, right at the crease of the hip. Hopefully I don't fall. And then what we do from here is we want to just anchor the left foot, and I want to pull into the left foot so that I'm pulling my whole body forward while I'm keeping my right knee anchored down here. This is a great stretch for the psoas. And finally, we're going to stretch out the iliopsoas by taking a nice supported bridge. This is a gentle, relaxing pose. You guys can take it anytime during your shavasana. And just really sit in the pose, Take your deep breathing, concentrate on relaxing, and really start to lengthen out those muscles. So what we want to do, lay on your back, bend at the knees, bring the heels to the seat. We want to lift the hips up, and you can play around with the height of your blocks. When I first started doing this, I had to place my block on the lowest setting, and even at that, when I would extend my legs, I would get a little bit of pain in my lower back. It just took me a while till I could go to the second height of the block. I worked it this way for a while, and now I'm able to come all the way up, put the block on end, straighten out the legs, and really just gently open up the hips. This one feels so good. Take this during your Shavasana, spend a few minutes in it, and it'll help correct that posture. All right, now to let you guys know what's really causing our lower cross syndrome, like I said, it is a tightness of the lower back and a tightness of the main hip flexor, the iliopsoas. And when it comes to the tissues of the lower back, you are going to have to really work this one consistently. As you can see, this isn't all muscle tissue back here. We actually have what's called fascia, which is basically almost like, you can think of this as a thick sheet of basically tendon material. It's very tight, it's very tough, and this is going to take you several years to stretch out. I know from experience. So when we want to correct this situation, this isn't something that's going to be done in 30 days or 3 months. We're talking, we're going to have to work at this for several years in order to correct our posture. But be patient with it, it'll happen. Our yoga practice is a lifelong practice anyways, so just enjoy the ride. And then if you guys want a little better look at what's happening in the front of the body, this is a little better view of what the iliopsoas looks like. So the iliopsoas is this long muscle here. This is actually our psoas. The iliacus is right here, but together they're just called the iliopsoas, because this is really the only part that we can actually, get to. That's one of the reasons this muscle becomes so tight, is beyond this point here, you really can't massage it because it's underneath. It's behind the abdominal wall. So it originates at the spine, the psoas does, and it comes all the way down and it inserts into the femur, and then the iliacus originates in the ilium of the hip bone and then inserts into the femur bone there. So this is what you're dealing with. This one just takes some stretching and some care. However, when it comes up to this thick, fibrous material in the lower back, you're really going to have to work hard on that. So just be aware and don't get frustrated when it doesn't happen overnight. When it comes to making progress in our practice, we have to remember that water cuts through stone not by force but by persistence. So we just need to come up with a plan and execute, and slowly over time these things will happen. You will progress, you will start to feel better, you will correct your posture. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Zach Sprinkle. This is E-Static.